You are listening to the Fly the W670 podcast, season 3, episode 12. We are under 50 days until opening day. Don't forget to listen, download, review, and most importantly, subscribe to the podcast. Follow on all the socials, Fly the W670 on Twitter, Instagram, Fly the W on Facebook. Email us at flythew670gmail.com and get your email answered right here on this podcast. Crawly, hope you're having a good week. We are a couple sleeps away from the big game, and then you will get all my focus back on our Cubs.
Oh yeah, the big game. Call it what you will, but opening day, spring training. I mean, all this stuff has gotten me absolutely crazy. I'm ready for this little game to be done, and then we can get rolling.
All right. So last weekend on Inside the Clubhouse, Cubs general manager Carter Hawkins was a guest with Bruce Levine. David Hall was off again. I think he might be coming back next week, but it was Bruce Levine doing all the talking and all the interviewing, and he does a great job booking that show. Carter Hawkins, his guest, and you and I have gone through it and pulled out what we thought was the most important stuff in case our listeners missed out on that.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, you got to listen to Inside the Clubhouse 9 to 11. Just such good baseball talk, especially if you're somebody that just is jonesing for some baseball. So I think that it was Bruce Levine and it was Mike Esposito.
That's right, Mike Esposito. Yep, pinch hitting. Good, yeah. Pun intended.
Pun intended. And so he comes in there. And, one of the first questions that was posed to Carter was about Michael Busch. As we sit here waiting for Cody Bellinger, the question is what if they don't sign him? That's a possibility. And so Michael Busch would probably be first man out of the gate. He was acquired with reliever Yancy Almonte for Jackson Ferris and Zaire Hope. Here's what Carter had to say about Michael Busch.
But looking at our current roster, we had some opportunities for at bats at first base, opportunities for at bats at third base. We got guys that are currently on the roster that have played well in those positions, but nobody that solidified that. And we're also looking for guys that can hit left-handed. So you check first, third, left-handed, ability to be here for a long time, and Michael Busch is kind of in the middle of that Venn diagram. He hasn't played a ton of first, but his ability over there is really, really solid, and feel like his hands and just know-how will help have that opportunity to be really, really good over there. And he has, totally dominated the minor leagues over the course of his career, but he was blocked. He was with the Dodgers, and then they have a couple of Hall of Famers at first and second. He can also play second. That obviously are going to get in his way of at bats. And so, we think that he's a potential, great member of our lineup that 100% can hit against righties and hopefully can play every day at some point. But we have, basically 6 years of control over him. So he's going to have a chance to be with us for a long time, and looking forward to that.
I like the Michael Busch Venn diagram, right? Lefty, plays first, all that stuff. But, Dustin, there was a line in there that kind of took my attention. It said 100% he can hit against righties and hopefully play every day at some point. I went and I pulled the numbers. Busch played in 125 games last season. He was splitting time between the big league Dodgers and their minor league affiliate in Oklahoma. In 98 games in AAA, Dustin, he slashed 323, 431, 618 with 27 homers and 90 RBIs. His walk rate was 13% and his strikeout rate was 18%. I mean, those numbers are off the charts. But
very good. Yeah, very good.
In 27 starts in the major, he was 167, 247, 292 with 2 home runs and 7 RBIs. Walk rate went down to 9% and the strikeout rate jumped up 33%. Dustin, there's nothing Michael Busch can get out of AAA anymore. This is he has an opportunity to be an everyday big leaguer or at least platoon. But this to me is his opportunity right now. There's nothing, like I said, he can do in AAA anymore.
No, it's, what they say, the old, or get off the pot time for a guy like this, right? He was blocked in LA with the Dodgers. So it makes all the sense in the world. Dodgers were, I guess, good enough, if you will, to let him spread his wings, hopefully. And he's going to do that over at Clark and Addison. So we're going to find out, right? I mean, we're going to find out. He's not a kid. He's not a kid anymore. He's done everything he can do there. It is either or get off the pot.
Yeah, his splits in AAA, he slashed 337, 445, 708 versus righties. There's no question he had no problem with righties in minor leagues. He had 25 home runs and 68 RBIs versus lefties, though. He slashed 294, 401, 429. But then you only get down to 2 home runs. So 25 versus 2 and 22 RBIs. So, Dustin, I'm just thinking for the time being, you got Patrick Wisdom, and, his splits are the opposite. So, when you're facing a good lefty, let Patrick Wisdom take the at-bats, and then Busch can take most of the starts against righties, and he's going to be fine.
Yeah, I mean, that make right now, based on the construction of this roster that I'm sure everybody's not thrilled about, what you're saying makes total sense. Yes.
Now, the obvious 800-pound gorilla in the room that they talked about on Inside the Clubhouse was Cody Bellinger. And obviously, we all are waiting around, and Carter wants you to know that they aren't just sitting on their hands here.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally you've taken a step away from, or taken a step back on just any free agent acquisition. And we talked about this a little bit around CubsCon, and have certainly, had this come up often as, whether our pace has been perceived to be slower, faster, or anything of the sort. But, it's basically trying to find overlap, our interest in terms of how we view a player and the player's interest in terms of how he views himself. And when there's overlap on those two things, deals get made. When there isn't, deals don't get made. And sometimes that's a long process. So, I think generally we just try to take our focus towards that versus all the things going on around us. And that typically leads to good decisions. And that's the idea, is make really good decisions, because really good decisions are going to help us win more games than the alternative. And just try to focus there. So that's where Jed and I are on a day-to-day basis. Just because there's not deals being made doesn't mean that we're not working the phones every single day and working on, trying to find those overlaps every single day. We certainly are. But we understand that the fans want to see the results, and we get that, but we just try to stay focused on our process and what we can do and what we can control.
Working the phones every single day, like Dustin Rhodes on the Mully and Haw show. When they talk about the overlap, he said our interest in how we view a player and the player's interest in how he views himself. And of course, Scott Boras is in that conversation. And a lot of people are saying, the Cubs are going to sign one of the big 4 Boras clients left. You're talking about Chapman, you're talking about Montgomery, and obviously you're clearly talking about Cody Bellinger. But again, at what price? And I, if you are talking about $230 million or north of $200 million for Cody Bellinger after 1 year of a really successful year at Wrigley, that's a huge leap of faith that you're taking there.
Oh, big leap of faith, Crawly.
And so I don't, I understand where this is coming from. If they're asking for that much, I just, and again, don't paint yourself in a corner. Don't outbid yourself if the Blue Jays want to get desperate. But when you get desperate, that's when you sometimes make some bad decisions. And I'd love Cody to be back on a 5-year, $160 million deal, but 6 years at 230.
Yeah, it's a little pricey. The other thing I heard today, listening to lots of different things like I do, is that the Cubs have negotiated with Boras and Bellinger. Like they have given kind of their last and final, if you will, because I guess Boras is known as the type that if he gets something better that he likes from Toronto, let's say, he's not going to come back to the Cubs and say, oh, by the way, Toronto offered this. What say you? Like, he's just going to go to Toronto. So the Cubs have to know that they've kind of made last and final and best in this situation, if that's true, that's how Boras handles things.
Yeah, wait and see here, working the phones. But Carter was asked about Shota Imanaga. And for those of you following me on Twitter at Crawly's Cubs, our guy, Rich Biesterfeld, with the first photos of Shota in Mesa. And Justin Steele on Twitter had some positive things to say. So this is I'm getting more excited about Shota Imanaga, and this is what Carter had to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think every team in the league for any starting pitcher says, all right, I have some interest because he is a starting pitcher. And so that was
right.
The first box to check with Shota. I mean, it's just the availability of good innings in this league is it's just tough to find. And, when you have that, it's like gold. And then to have somebody that's left-handed that's shown that have that ability, in the Japanese professional leagues to be an ace and a pitch mix that, hopefully will apply to the game here in the States, and the mindset and the work ethic to make the adjustments that are necessary, when you make that transition. We saw that, obviously with Seiya, just having to make some of those transitions. It's not easy. It happens, at different times. Sango with the Mets had a really good year last year, his first year. And so don't want to rule out, being elite in your first year, but at the same time, you can imagine transitioning not only from one league to another, but from one country to another, and then one culture to another. And that's hard. So you want somebody with that mindset of trying to improve. And I guess you kind of saw a little bit of that in the press conference, that mindset of okay, what can I do to relate here? What can I do to really, endear myself, and hopefully he's able to do that on the field too.
So he says, the availability of good innings in this league, it's hard to find. And when you have it, it's like gold. Dustin, the one thing about Imanaga is in the Japanese league, he always was throwing close to 140 to 170 innings year after year, starting in 2016. So, I think that the era of Fergie Jenkins throwing 200 innings, that just doesn't happen as much as we would like it to, with the idea of not going more than 3 times through the order and all this stuff. I mean, I think, I was a little bit nervous, and we'll see how the Cubs play this, but his durability seems to be something that really has benefited him. Yeah,
definitely durable. I don't want to go here, but do you feel like there's a little bit of excuse making? I wasn't necessarily thrilled with that answer, saying hey, we got to give the guy a break. And no. This is the Cubs. This is Chicago. This team is trying to win the division and play in October. Why are we setting the bar way down here? I'm not saying it's got to be way up here, but how about somewhere in the middle? It just seemed like, to tap the brakes, culture and changing locations, and it's tough and blah, 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 blah. Well, okay.
We've talked about this before.
Am I overreacting to that comment?
No, I hear what you're saying, and I understand what Carter's saying. I think that the difference is that with Seiya Suzuki on the team, I think it's going to alleviate, because Seiya was navigating that all by himself, right? He's got the interpreter.
But where was that comment? Did I miss that comment?
I think that it's going to help having Seiya there. Now,
right. I agree with you 100%. Why didn't Carter say that? Why didn't Carter say that? I mean, right. I mean, maybe to not put extra pressure on Seiya Suzuki. Maybe. I'm just saying. I just don't.
I think more than anything, you just take a look, and it's an adjustment in a lot of different ways, and just to kind of, sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. And I've seen that before, sometimes it translates well and sometimes it doesn't. So if you're expecting him to be the ace of the staff, he was never an ace as far as when we were considering the offseason, right? We were talking about Yamamoto. We were talking about Ohtani. Imanaga is going to be a really good pitcher, but I think that just kind of tempering expectations, and who knows, he might surprise you. So that's what I'm hoping for. Now, Bruce did bring up the 6-man rotation. The Mets were very deliberate with Kodai, and they gave him a rest when they felt necessary. And I thought with the Cubs pitching depth, that might be considered, but Carter will go on to say that, they're going to go with something a little more traditional. But I just wonder, Dustin, how long it's going to be until you start to see more of those 6-man rotations popping up. The next question asked was about what Carter and the front office expect from PCA after his cup of coffee last season.
Yeah, looking to see some of the adjustments from the challenges that he faced. Those definitely created some opportunities for him to make some changes that'll help him to, be a little bit more effective offensively and on the base pass, and make a little bit better decisions there, and utilize the strengths that he has. In order for him to get the speed to actually produce major league value, he's got to get on base, and to get on base, he's got to make contact and, take balls out of the zone, and things that he did really well in the minor leagues. And clearly it was a small sample in the big leagues, but it was a big opportunity for him to see the things that he needs to do. So he's working his tail off in Arizona this whole offseason, working with Dustin Kelly, our hitting coach, on those things. And Defensively, he's got some natural skills there that, we're looking forward to see him play here at some point. But the expectation is just to see the work that he's put in and then to continue that work and continue that development for him so that he can be the type of major leaguer that we all know he can be.
So the one thing that stood out to me on that one is just, he has to be more effective offensively and on the base pass, make a little bit better decisions and utilize the strengths he has. I like the fact that he's out in Arizona and he's been working with Dustin Kelly. Obviously, that's going to help. But Dustin, I feel like people have overreacted to a very small sample size of PCA last year. He made his debut in Colorado last season. He appeared in 13 games, Dustin, and he was hitless in 14 at bats. But out of those 13 games, he only started 3 of those. In 5 games, he did not have a single at bat, and 4 games, he only had 1 at bat. So, I mean, it's really, really hard. That's why they don't want pitchers facing guys a 4th or a 5th time through the order. So if you only see a guy once, how can you make adjustments? You get what I'm saying?
Right. I mean, it was a very small, you did the cup of coffee reference. That was a good one, but it was a very small cup of coffee. It was kind of like an espresso, right? Maybe with your pinky out when you're having that little, the little cup. I mean, that's how quick it was. And he had a few spectacular defensive plays. He also had some spectacularly bad trips on the bases, and he was asked to bunt a whole bunch, not swing away. He was asked to bunt. Not that you can't get a bunt down, but I don't think that Craig Counsell is going to be asking him to bunt. And I think later on, when somebody does a deep dive as to why David Ross and the Cubs finally broke up, bunting might be in the top 3 reasons. Too much bunting might be in the top 3 reasons why David Ross isn't the manager of the Chicago Cubs anymore.
I think bunting played a factor in it, but remember Craig during CubsCon mentioned he'd like to see PCA bunt. So I think it's more bunting with the right guys in the right situation. You don't do it in the 7th inning with Patrick Wisdom. No, that doesn't happen. But he mentioned PCA being a lefty and being super fast. Patrick Wisdom is not a lefty and he's not super fast. And so PCA making contact and getting on base is where he's going to give you the best offensive bang for your buck. And, once he, in defensive, he's going to absolutely be worthwhile for you to keep there. So I just like, here's the thing. PCA has just an obscene amount of God-given talent. I went to go see him in different minor league ballparks, but when you get to the major leagues, everybody is phenomenal. And I saw him, like you said, a couple of times. He gets picked, he got caught stealing twice. And so he had 2 stolen bases, caught stealing twice, but I think that kind of surprised him. So I think he's going to learn from that. It's not just going to be speed that's going to help him. He has to be able to read the pitcher's movements and those, and when to, what kind of lead to get. And those type of things are going to be a lot more important in the majors than they were for him in AAA. He could have stole off anybody in AAA. It wasn't a big deal. Not going to happen that way in the majors.
Right. Kind of the same thing what we talked about with the first question, right? Of this segment, we're breaking down the interview, right? The Cubs' new first baseman. There's nothing left for PCA to do in the minor leagues, in my opinion. There really isn't, except probably learn how to hit a little bit better. But I mean, hopefully they get Bellinger back and you can have that luxury, if you will.
Yeah, good transition, right? Speaking of transitions, the last question from this interview was about the workload between Yan Gomes and Miguel Amaya. Great question by Bruce. Here's the thing: is Amaya going to start taking more of the workload? And what Carter replied.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of naming who's going to catch 100 and who's going to catch 60 probably isn't smart at this point. But what I will say is that, Miguel, he's out of options. He's going to be on our major league club, barring injury. And, this is an opportunity for him to really step up and really be a part of the leadership of this team. And there's no better person to learn that from than Yan Gomes.
So 100% on that is he has no option. So if you're gonna cut him, he has to go through waivers, which he's not going to make it through.
They're not going to do that. They're not
right.
They're not going to drop him down. It's just not going to happen. These are your 2 catchers for the 2024 season. These are your guys. There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it. And I think Yan Gomes is a great guy to have as a mentor.
I'll tell you this, Dustin. Yan Gomes shocked everybody last season. He slashed 267, 315, 408 with 10 home runs and 63 RBIs. He caught 92 games and played 10 as a DH. But Dustin, he's going to be 36 this season. And that offensive performance was an anomaly. That's not the normal Yan Gomes. We got lucky on that one. Now, after not playing for most of the last 3 years because of injury and COVID and all sorts of things, Amaya makes an amazing comeback in 2023. He started with the Smokies, makes his debut May 4th when Gomes was on the IL with a concussion, sent down May 11th, but then he was back up on June 3rd where he stayed. Tucker Barnhart was showed the door. He slashed 214, 329, 359 with 5 homers and 18 RBIs. He started 33 games at catcher and DH'd another 8 games. But as a 36-year-old catcher, I mean, Amaya's going to have to take more of the load. And again, like PCA and like Michael Busch, this is his opportunity here to make a name for himself and to become an everyday major leaguer.
Yep. And that's what I look forward to it. I like him a lot. I like him a lot as a player.
And the pitchers like throwing to him. So let's just kind of keep our fingers crossed.
Yep. That's a big part of it. There is no doubt about that. You got to keep those pitchers happy. You are listening to the Fly the W670 podcast. This is episode 12 of season 3. Crawly, we are 50 days or less to opening day. Unbelievable. Don't forget to download. Don't forget to listen. Don't forget to subscribe to the Fly the W podcast. And don't forget to leave those 5-star reviews. Well, in this segment of the show, we have Dan Kantrovitz talking to Crawly.
Joining me now on the Fly the W podcast, I'm glad to have back our old friend Dan Kantrovitz. He is the vice president of scouting for your Chicago Cubs. Dan, how are you today?
I'm great, Craw. Just as I was mentioning earlier, bouncing between a few different points, a few different games. So already on the run, but it's not getting old. So it's getting cold, but not old.
Yeah. Well, first off, big congratulations to you and your team. As you know, MLB Pipeline released their top 100 prospect list, and the Cubs topped all 30 MLB teams with 7 prospects in the top 100. That had to make the team feel real good, huh?
Yeah, it certainly can't be a bad thing. And we had our scouts in town for our January meetings last week, and I think that was one of the things I said when I was just giving the meeting kickoff. But then the other thing I quickly said was, that's sort of what we've done up to this point, and it doesn't mean that we're going to keep having success going forward, without a pretty concerted effort to do so. I think we probably allowed us 15 seconds to sort of pat everybody on the back and say, nice job, but now it's looking ahead and making sure that everybody keeps grinding. But yeah, it's never a bad thing, I think, to have a lot of prospects and in those third-party rankings. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of other good systems out there that might not get the attention from third-party wise that we got to make sure that we stay ahead of and aren't getting complacent.
Absolutely. Now, before we talk about any individual players, maybe you could tell our listeners a little bit about how the drafting process goes. The 2024 draft will be during the All-Star festivities around July 16th. So after the 2023 draft ends, at what point do you guys start looking towards the 2024 draft?
Yeah, the way things are set up now, they used to have, a few years ago, we had the draft in June, and then they moved it to July. We're actually starting to evaluate what we call sort of platform year +1 players even before the draft. So it's not a situation where, it's just sort of tunnel vision on this year's class until the draft, and then all of a sudden we hit reset and go to next year's class. We actually are starting to evaluate next year's class, probably a month or two even before the draft starts. There's events that, show us players that are eligible for the draft in even 2 or 3 years, but we're recording notes, we're evaluating them. But I don't think it really starts probably until a month or two before the coming draft. And then I think the signing deadline is probably a real good line of demarcation where we just sort of put the current year behind us and say now it's just looking straight ahead to the next year's draft.
Now, you talked about your scouts a little bit earlier. Each scout has their own region that they have to cover around the country. Is that right?
Yeah, so the way that we're set up is we have roughly 40 domestic scouts in the United States, including Puerto Rico. And so, we have roughly 15 area scouts that are responsible for, um, in some cases, 2 or 3 states. In some cases, if it's a highly concentrated state, maybe just a small part of a state. Um, and then the next layer we call our regional coordinators, and their job is to really just sort of quarterback that region, kind of be the air traffic controller of all the information that we're acquiring on players, all the information that we still need to acquire on players, and really helping develop and bring the area scouts along, just from a professional development standpoint. And then on top of that, we have another layer, the national cross-checking layer, and we have 4 of those. And they're just extremely critical to just sort of the boots on the ground, just pure evaluators. They'll go in and evaluate probably 200 players every year and turn in those and submit reports on them. And just end up having probably the most calibrated opinions just because they end up seeing the most players. But so area scouts, regional coordinators, national cross-checkers, a few folks in the office who are critical to everything we do, and then myself.
Wow. So you got all your bases covered, so to speak. But, you came from, you were in St. Louis for a little bit, you were in Oakland for a little bit, but your first draft with the Cubs, 2020, one of the weirdest drafts in history with COVID creating complete havoc on the process. How would you say the drafting process has evolved for you with the Cubs since 2020?
From a process standpoint, I think we've, evolved pretty substantially, and it's been a gradual process. Each year, we try to make some tweaks and some improvements to what we're doing, both from sort of a draft day decision-making process, as well as sort of just the scouting process leading up to it. But I don't think it's been. I expect us to probably have the same sort of similar, just continuous improvement going forward as we've had the last few years.
Now, MLB recently has implemented new rules, no shifts, making the bags bigger to increase stolen bases. Has that had a big impact on how you scout certain players?
I don't think it's had a big impact on how we scout players. I think, at times you see some of those macro trends. You see them sort of rear their heads in the college game, in terms of just strategy. And then maybe that starts to influence some of the performance statistics that we're collecting. But I think, for the most part, from an influencing our scouting standpoint, no, it's still just going out there and trying to evaluate current tools and project those into the future, and try to figure out who's going to be a big leaguer. And then if they're the game, if their tool set is reliant on just some strategy changes, then we're probably overvaluing that player a little too high.
So MLB Network has a show during the winter meetings, and they reveal the pick you're going to have, right? They've changed it up a little bit. Andre Dawson's there representing the Cubs, the Hawk. Were you there during that process in the winter meetings, or where were you? Were you watching it in real time, or does it not really matter if you're drafting 14th versus 17th?
No, it matters a lot. It just doesn't really matter where you are when you're watching that show, because there's nothing you can do about it to influence the outcome. So where I was is I was at the winter meetings, with the rest of our staff, and there was probably 20 of us or so. We were watching it unfold on MLB TV, just like everybody else, up in our suite. And I probably was sweating a little bit more than some of the other people in the room. But I felt like probably the best way to handle what any news that we might get would be with the rest of the group.
That would be fun, and it's funny because obviously some of us have watched the movie like Moneyball, or we've seen Draft Day with the football and all that stuff. Yeah. When you're getting to that week of the draft, you're setting up your board. Now it's all the scouts, I'm assuming. Are the pitching and hitting directors there? And does everyone kind of speak up and say who they think you should pick when it comes to your time?
Yeah. So I think something that we try to do is, minimize any sort of audibling or pivoting that, we have to do in the moment, because there's just so much going on, so many calls with agents, so many calls with our scouts, reacting to what other teams are doing. So to the extent that you can, prepare ahead of time and sort of weed out anything that you might end up having to do during the draft, and just make that process a little bit smoother and streamlined, we do. So I think one of the things that we try to do well in advance now is have those discussions, with our scouts, with our analysts, with our front office, a few weeks even before the draft, sometimes even a month before. And so we break up into regions and have regional meetings, and it's kind of this like traveling road show where you'll go to the West Coast one day, the next day you'll be in the Midwest meeting with our group of scouts there, the next day in the Southeast with our group of scouts there, and so forth. And then we'll aggregate all that information, making the adjustments that we need to make to our model, make sure that we have all the information we need going into the draft. And then I'll meet with the executive leadership group, a few days before the draft, explain to them sort of what things look like, sort of where we're at on certain players, what sort of pieces of information we might still need, how they can help in terms of acquiring maybe signability information through certain agents, what they're hearing from other teams. And then going into the draft, you'd like to sort of be on autopilot. It never ends up being that easy and that smooth, because there's just always things you need to react to in the moment. But I think the sort of the scene of like it being this chaotic, hey, take this player, take that player. That's not quite how it is anymore. But there's still a lot going on, and just the gravity of every decision is so important. And that's what makes it so much fun too.
I can imagine. Now, you guys seem to have a lot of luck, or I don't want to say luck. You guys seem to do a really good job of drafting players in the later rounds. I'm looking at Frankie Scalzo. BJ Murray was in the futures game. Brody McCullough, Hayden McCreary. Do you find it to be a little bit more tricky to draft players later in the draft? How is that compared to, like, say, picking in the earlier rounds?
So the stakes are different in the sense that you're not spending $4 million on one of those players, but at the same time, with a 20-round draft, every player we draft is critical, and we treat every single draft with put a lot of focus on every single pick, and so I don't think just because somebody is a 15th round pick anymore means that they're any less important than somebody we took on the previous day, say on day 2. But I think the reality is you end up having a little bit less information as you go down that kind of draft curve from the first pick to the as you get into the thousands and the 20th round. So I think the information becomes a little bit less as you sort of get into that area, and your confidence and sort of your evaluation might be a little bit less. But at the same time, we end up having so much information on players these days that we're as excited about some of those guys as we are, about some of our earlier picks. So, I think there's definitely some, it helps to have luck on your side, but it also helps to have good scouts and a good process. And, if you have all those three things sort of meshed together at the right time, then you can come up with hopefully some pretty good picks.
Nice. Now, once a player's drafted and they've kind of gone on their way in their pro career, how much communication do you have with some of those players? Do you see them around in the minors at all?
Yeah. See them in the minors, see them at the affiliates, see them at spring training, frequently texting with them throughout the season, even the off season. There's a little quiet period now where we can't really talk to them. That's, a couple weeks, but you get so close with these guys that, you end up, I was telling one of our pitching coaches this the other day, when you're watching them, whether it's in person, whether it's on, on MILB TV, I mean, you feel like, you're part of their family. You feel like almost their dad at times, where, if they get a bad call, you're angry because, things didn't go their way. And you become a cheerleader in some ways for all these guys. And it's, you're just so deeply invested in that pick and the time that went into it, and just the process. And you want to see them succeed as much as anybody. So, I think, whether it's texting with the players themselves, sometimes their parents, it's that line of communication with them never ends.
Well, speaking about being a proud parent, you had 2 of your draft picks for the Cubs reach the major leagues in 2023. You had 4th round pick Luke Little from 2020 and 2021 1st round pick Jordan Wicks get their debuts this year. How excited was that for you? And were you watching when they made their debut with the big club?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I remember I was actually with my family watching Jordan Wicks his debut on TV, and I think that first, I was traveling, I couldn't get there in person, and on a scouting trip, and I'm seeing it on TV, and I'm in another room, I think, as that first inning's unfolding, just kind of sweating buckets, and not even really wanting to watch, and just sort of listening to, I think, the announcers talk about it, and I could just envision sort of his pitches behave the way that we'd seen him back when he was in college, and it got a little tenuous there for a few pitches. But one of the things that our scouts saw in Jordan, and that I think is probably pretty clear to people now, is this guy is as tough as it gets, and he's not going to get fazed by a few things not going his way, and he's just going to keep rolling, and he did. And it's looking back on it, I think that was one of the more memorable debuts I can remember. But yeah, I think I can speak for all the scouts that were part of that process. That I feel like we all felt like proud parents at that moment.
Now, you guys took a gamble when you drafted Cade Horton as high as you did, especially he had missed some time with with Tommy John, and now Cade Horton is in everybody's top 3 Cubs prospects. He's rated 26 in MLB Pipeline's top 100. What gave you the confidence to draft Cade when you did, and maybe other people didn't think that was the right pick at the spot?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the toughest things to do is kind of block out the noise during the draft of how famous this guy might be, or how famous that guy might be, or where he's expected to be taken, and just sort of relying on the fact that we believe we have the best information going in the draft, and we're going to use that information regardless of whether it aligns with expected of us or not. And so I think when you say gamble, I can understand sort of why you might say that, but at the same time, I think every pick has risk associated with it, and or some level of uncertainty, and that's always going to be the case. But I think our job is to assess that level of uncertainty relative to the potential reward, and in our estimation, when we look at the case of Cade Horton, that risk reward profile was well worth the pick.
Now, you took Jackson Wiggins in the 2nd round of the 23 draft. He missed his junior season at the University of Arkansas with some Tommy John surgery, but you were confident in making him the pick. What when you have a guy that's injured, but you've been scouting him enough, because Tommy John surgery, to be honest, is pretty common nowadays, is that you feel comfortable at the time of being like, yeah, these guys are going to come back, and what we saw is worth the pick?
Yes, I think we feel comfortable that Jackson's going to come back. He's already starting to throw some pens in Arizona. Looks great physically. Has just been crushing it from a strength and conditioning standpoint. And I think while it's a disruptive surgery, no doubt, I think the reality is that the science is there for players that do return to an expected level, and when we saw Jackson prior to that, it was electric at times, and there's going to be some things that he's going to have to work through with some of our experts in our pitching side, but it's a combination of projection and electric stuff, and that I don't think we probably would have gotten in that stage of the draft had he been healthy the entire year. He's a special kid.
Another special kid's James Triantos. He got a lot of attention in the Arizona Fall League this season. Mm-hmm. You draft him out of high school. He did okay in Myrtle Beach, but I've heard that, and other people have said that it's hard to hit in Pelican Park and the Carolina League in general. How hard is it to evaluate the progress of hitters at Myrtle Beach? And do you think Triantos is going to settle in one position, or is his versatility going to help him get to the majors?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the hardest thing about evaluating a hitter in where there's a park effect that really has sort of a run suppressing effect is what it does to the player mentally. I think the tools and the math is out there that you can make the adjustments on the performance and consider sort of how this player might have done in a different environment. But what I don't think you always can assess very well is the extent to which a player might react to just really getting a hold of one and knowing that ball's out in any other park, and then having it, the left fielder be camped right out on, under it, 20 feet from the fence. And, that's a little deflating, as a hitter. And then, do you adjust your stance do you adjust your approach? Do you start swinging out of the zone? You start, incorporating an uppercut. I think there's just things that hitters do that, because they're human, when you're in an environment like that you might not otherwise do. And so I think, we can, normalize and have an equivalency for a player's stats there versus somewhere else. But I think the effect mentally is something that, is not always easy to assess. But, with James, I mean, James can hit, and James can, he controls the zone. He hits for a lot of contact. I mean, he can, we think damage is coming. I think you saw that in the Arizona Fall League. We've seen it in spurts before. And I think the other thing was he was coming into this last year with a little bit banged up. And the kid's as tough as it gets, and so he's not gonna sit out. I mean, he did have a minor knee surgery that kept him out for, I want to say, a month or so. But he had a few other things that he was banged up and probably compensating for. And once he sort of, I think, hit his stride, we didn't really see that until the Fall League. And I think that's more who we'll probably see in the future, is my guess.
Now, we talked a little bit about Cade Horton. You had another first-round pick this year, Matt Shaw, who rocketed through the minors. And between Horton and Shaw, they're on the championship team for the Tennessee Smokies.
Yeah.
People are kind of freaking out. They're like, well, we don't need a third baseman. Matt Shaw can start. And I'm like, well, hold the horses here a little bit. He's just coming up. What goes into determining how fast a player advances through the minor leagues, and how careful do you have to be not to rush them to the majors?
Yeah. I think a player generally tells you, when they're ready. And if you're sitting around a table debating whether so-and-so is ready, it probably means he's not, just based on, having done this for a little bit. And I think, it's the same thing when you're promoting a guy up the ladder in the minor leagues. If they're just dominating the level and clearly playing, consistently above that level, I think you're probably doing the player a disservice. And that's the way our player development operation, looks at it, if you're not just challenging them. So I think they generally tell you, as opposed to sort of us having to sort of sit back and say, well, is so-and-so ready or is he not? And then, there's the issue of, well, is there a place for him to play at the next level? Is he going to get the consistent at bats? Is he going to play where we need him to play defensively? So there's those things that factor into it too. But I think, Matt forced our hand last year. I mean, when you come out and do what he did, as much as you probably want to be conservative and not just sort of rocket a guy through the system. He got to a point where we didn't really have a choice but to promote him, which is a pretty good problem to have.
Now, Shaw, Horton, college players. We talked about James Triantos, a high school player. When you're talking about like the philosophy on a first round draft pick and you're deciding between a college and high school player, do you think about the different timelines in growth as compared to, like, say, organizational needs?
So I think organizational needs don't first and foremost is a player's development. That's going to be, put ahead of any sort of organizational needs early on. Now, when they're called up or when they're being considered for a call up, the major league team, obviously, that's when needs really come into play. If we have a need for a right fielder or second baseman or left-handed late inning reliever, that's, I think, where it gets a little tricky as well. Do we think this guy might be able to make this, handle this position at the big league level, because that's where we need, because he's certainly not going to play here because this guy has it on lockdown. So I think throughout the minor league progression, you try to make it all about the player. And then once it's time for that call up, I think it does, inevitably become about some, major league team needs. And I think one thing that's tricky on our end is try to get out in front of that a little bit in the minor leagues. And, if we see that sort of coming, we don't want to just be blindsided and say, oh, now we need a second baseman. This guy's never played second base in the minor leagues. And so I think that's where you start to see a little bit of the, let's move this guy around and get him some reps here. I think versatility is never a bad thing for players. I think that the modern game has showed that, the more versatile a player is, the more opportunities he's probably going to get to contribute in the major leagues.
Now, how much did the did the use of the tacky ball at AA? They had a tackier ball this year. How difficult did it make that in evaluating players and their progressions, both the pitchers and the hitters?
Yeah, I think there were, I don't think it ended up. I don't think they ended up using it the entire season. So it was somewhat of an experiment, you could say, where you could evaluate pre and post tack. But yeah, I think, did it enable pitchers to sort of rip the curveball a little bit harder, and juice, the spin rate potentially? Did it make it a little bit more difficult for a hitter in some cases if, he's seen a little bit more bite or a little bit later break on this pitch, or, a little bit more, quote unquote, rise on a heater? I think, I think we did notice some artifacts of that, but I also think it's probably something we won't know for a few years until we really, continue to study the effects. But I think that's something that most likely did impact performance in a few ways.
Now, I heard Craig Counsell at CubsCon talking, and he talked a lot about prospects. He talked about how, a lot of times people build these kids up, and then if they're not immediately successful, and they go down the minors, then they kind of get torn down a little bit. When a player makes it to the big leagues and they get a cup of coffee and it doesn't work out as much as they hoped it would, what does the organization do to help them regain their confidence and address issues that may have been exploited in the big league level?
Yeah, I think some of that gets back to the player's makeup, and trying even at the level of the draft, and trying to just find those players that have that stick-to-itiveness and that ability to manage stress and overcome adversity. And sometimes players have those qualities naturally. Sometimes they learn like coping mechanisms and strategies later on through our mental skills or through outside means. But I think you need players that can kind of overcome that. And I think look at a guy like Matt Mervis last year. He wasn't. I think he was like a lot of players that with a lot of talent and skill that are probably going to be really good big leaguers. Like I think he's going to be. That get up there and don't experience that initial success, and then have to go back down and still perform. And he went back down and continued to rake. So I think, you got to be mentally tough like that. But at the same time, I think it's something where, it helps to, be able to have some patience and be able to sort of come back down, regroup, and then get a chance to go back up there. So, the player also needs opportunities.
Well, Dan, I appreciate you taking some of your time. I know you are a traveling Roman man and you're always a busy man, but I love having these conversations with you and just kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit and getting an idea, because it's fun to watch these young kids. It's fun to watch their development. And I think the Cubs organization and a lot, like you said, a lot of third-party evaluators think you guys are just doing a terrific job. And I appreciate all that you guys are doing and for taking some time to talk to us today.
Thanks, Carl. Appreciate you having me on. Take care.
You are listening to the Fly the W670 podcast, and we are under 50 days until opening day. It's episode 12 of season 3. Don't forget to leave Crawly and I a 5-star review. Don't forget to listen. Don't forget to download. Of course, we want you to subscribe to the Fly the W podcast. Crawly, the hot stove news is very, very quiet. And we are less than a week away from pitchers and catchers reporting to Arizona or Florida. Of course, the Cubs are going out to Arizona, like you.
Yes, sir. The Cubs made a few minor moves. All they did was officially announce the 3 pitchers that they signed to minor league contracts with an invite to Major League spring training. Former Cub Carl Edwards Jr., right-handed pitcher Sam McWilliams, and the greatest name of all time, I may have to get this on a jersey, left-handed pitcher Richard Lovelady.
Lovelady.
McWilliams was out of the game for 1.5 years, but he did well in winter ball in the Mexican and Dominican League, so the Cubs are going to take a flyer. Richard Lovelady impressed the Cubs during a session at Driveline. The other move the Cubs made was trading Michael Rucker to the Phillies for cash considerations. But Dustin, around the league, a couple of big moves. Clayton Kershaw re-signed with the Dodgers. We don't have the exact dollar figures yet, but the deal is for the 2024 season with a player option for 2025. How about Jose Altuve? He's going to finish his career with the Astros, agreeing to 5 years, $125 million extension. That's going to keep him in Houston until 2029. And the other big one, how about what the Royals did with Blake DeWitt? I mean, that is absolutely unbelievable. An 11-year extension. He's going to be making $288 million. And for the Royals, that's the largest contract in team history. There's multiple opt-outs. And if he doesn't exercise any of those, the Royals would receive a 3-year option after the 2034 campaign. But for a small market team, that's a big move.
Yeah, it's a huge move. And I believe they have spent more money than anybody else this offseason, correct?
It's up there. They're up there. And when you look at some of these
maybe
teams,
not other, maybe in the American League. Maybe it's the American League. Probably not more than the Dodgers, but maybe in the American League.
Yeah, 100%. I think it is in the American League that they've spent the most. So hey, you know what? Good on the Royals, man. They're making moves, and I think that's going to really help them out in the long run. Now, the Cubs did release their coaching staff in the minor leagues. We'll talk a little bit more with all the guys from Iowa and Tennessee and South Bend and Myrtle Beach, but some interesting moves here. Marty Peavy returns for his 12th season as manager of the Iowa Cubs. The defending champion, Tennessee Smokies, get a new manager, Lance Reimel, who guided South Bend to a championship in 2022. Dustin, I met Lance a couple times, and here's what I'm going to tell you. This is a guy that you really want to kind of circle the name, and maybe I'm going to write something down after this to come back to. I think this guy is going to be a much sought-after managerial candidate in the future. I think this guy's future is really bright, so just something to watch to see how he does now moving up to Double-A. That means there's an opening in South Bend. Nick Lavallo will take over. He coached the Arizona Complex League Cubs. And then, Dustin, an institution. Buddy Bailey is returning to manage the Myrtle Beach Pelicans in his 36th season as a minor league manager. Dustin, Bailey has 2,355 regular season victories. It is the most among active minor league managers and third all time.
That's pretty good. That also means what? He's been around for quite some time, right?
My goal is to get Buddy Bailey on this podcast. That is my goal for 2024.
All right, let's make it happen. I'm for it.
Now, another guy that would be fun to have on the podcast. How about Jon Lester?
Yeah, he would be fun. He can be crotchety, but when you get him talking baseball, he's pretty damn good.
Well, you know what? I got a whole stocked bar here. He can come down here. We could have a couple of beers and tell some stories. But he did talk to Odyssey Insider and USA Today columnist Bob Nightengale. And I thought this was interesting, Dustin. Nightengale wrote that Lester still feels closer to the Cubs than the Red Sox, with friends still working in the organization. But he concedes his passion towards the Cubs has slightly waned with the firing of manager David Ross, his former teammate and close friends. Talking to people, I understand. I saw Rossi over New Year's and kind of understood their decision, but you don't want your buddies to lose their job. It sucks. It kind of stung. So, I mean, a lot of that was surprising. He's closer to the Cubs than the Red Sox. I mean, how many guys are still left on the team?
But I wonder now that Theo's back, in a real role with the Red Sox, if that changes things too.
Yeah, you have Theo over there, and our former pitch director that he was close with went over there to take over as GM. So, there's a lot of things, but it was
obviously
interesting
obviously him and David Ross were super tight. I mean, the reason David Ross was on the Cubs is because Jon Lester was on the Cubs.
Absolutely. So we'll see how it happens. And Nightengale mentioned that he wanted to go to a couple spring training games. So I'm hoping, just like that, I get a sighting of Jon Lester at Mesa. I'll be looking, man. I'm going to be looking.
You'll be looking. Looking.
Dustin, we know that Crane Kenny talked on The Score with David Haw about this previously, and it has been made official. Connor Bedard making the announcement live at Wrigley Field. The Cubs put out a promo video. Wrigley Field was chosen to host the NHL Winter Classic in 2025 as the Blackhawks will take on the St. Louis Blues. Second time that Wrigley has hosted the Winter Classic. The first, Dustin, all the way back in 2009. How interested are you in going to that game?
I like it, but I thought of you when this first came out, and I thought of me, and you have told myself and our great listening audience how wonderful the Cubs Winter Wonderland and the Kris Kringle Market and all that stuff are. And you were right. And we celebrated my daughter's birthday there with a couple of her friends and had a great family afternoon at Wrigley Field. And I'm worried that with this game, that will not be the same next year. If any, it'll be an abbreviated version at best. And they may have to cancel the whole thing altogether because the NHL is going to come in there and make sure that thing is buttoned up, because that, for a lack of a better term, is almost the NHL Super Bowl, if you will, that outdoor winter classic. So there's a lot of eyes on it. NBC, TNT, Turner, who's ever going to have the rights to that game. So I wonder if that's going to get in the way of our ice skating on Wrigley Field.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I would say that, this year they closed the Winterland a week before Cubs convention. So right around the first week of January, I think, is when they closed it up.
Yeah, but this game is typically played on New Year's Day. Now, they might not play it on New Year's Day this year because it's a packed sports calendar, and they look to try to get in a space where they kind of can own part of the day. It's going to be extra crowded because college football is going to that 12-team playoff. So there'll be a couple of games, not just one game necessarily. There'll be a handful of games on that day. So it's going to be interesting. They haven't said exactly. There is no date yet. It is in January of 25. That we know. It's against the Blues. That we know. But it has not been announced that it's January 1st. And I'm, listen, we went to Winter Wonderfest on the 27th of December. So you're not going to be able to take Winter Wonderfest down and put up a rink and seating and this and that and a stay. You're not going to be able to do it in 2-3 days. So I really wonder, I don't know that you could have that thing open like much past the second week of December. So maybe you go Thanksgiving. I'm very curious if the Cubs are going to announce they're going to take a year off because of this.
It'll be interesting.
I just wonder, and then maybe somebody's smart enough. I mean, you're trying to figure, would the Sox be smart enough to try to do something like that? Would Soldier Field do something like that? We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, the Soldier Field is going to have the Bears. As far as the White Sox, I don't know, but it's been about 16 years since they had one. So maybe they will, like I said, maybe they'll go from Thanksgiving to Christmas and then shut it down. And like you said, if they're able to have a week to do it, maybe that might be enough.
Maybe a week might be enough, but it won't be the same as it was this past year. That I think is very safe to say.
Yes, sir. Now, Dustin, two things came out very recently, and we're going to talk more about the next episode. So make sure you're tuning in because we're going to have Pacoda and we are going to have Cubs giveaways. I'm getting giddy about this next episode.
I knew when I saw the tweet about the what's coming out and the promotional calendar. I got an email. I texted with you about that. We need a little bit more time, but right now, Crawly, that's a wrap. Don't forget to listen, download, review, and subscribe to the Fly the W podcast. Follow on all the socials. Facebook, Instagram. Don't forget, you can email us, flythew670@gmail.com. Email us, and Crawly and I may answer your email right here on the pod. And now you can watch us. That's right. We're on YouTube by subscribing to the 670 The Score YouTube channel.
Dustin, we're almost there. The countdown's beginning. Go Cubs! Hey guys, it's Crawly. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Links are in the description. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Go Cubs!